McDonald's. Sure, it's not the healthiest place to eat, but when people do eat there, it tends to bring happiness to those who consume its wondrous fast food. You'd think nothing can go wrong in such a friendly restaurant. Unfortunately, even McDonald's has its share of scares. Here are some actual experiences people had at this popular fast food joint, and who probably won't be going there again. The McDonald's custodian. I don't eat fast food anymore. They say it kills people. I know that to be true, in a way. I haven't eaten McDonald's since December 20th, 2008. Like me, you probably grew up on Happy Meals. We always went to the same McDonald's location. Everything seemed normal and clean. The custodian had a great work ethic. He was always there, tall with long gray hair, unshaven. He looked like Filch from the Harry Potter movies. The custodian seemed to always look down and never smiled. One day, a couple of friends and I decided to have lunch at McDonald's. I saw the custodian polishing the Ronald McDonald statue, which was standing near the registers. My friend Adam somehow tipped his drink over and it fell on the floor, Coke spilling everywhere. The custodian showed up in no time with a mop next to us. When he mopped the last drop, he spaced out for a few seconds. Then he slowly lifted his eyes towards us, almost meeting ours, before scurrying off to the back, disappearing behind the registers. My friends and I all lifted our eyebrows and seemed to say, "What the fuck?" at the same time. We began to give the custodian funny nicknames, Stinky J, J for janitor naturally, and laugh at him. I thought he may have heard us as he walked off, and I felt bad. A few mornings later, I went to McDonald's for a coffee at 6 a.m. As I walked to sit down, I noticed the custodian near the bathrooms. I sipped my coffee, watching his twitchy movements. He was moving the Happy Meal promotional materials there. To the left of the Happy Meal materials was the Ronald McDonald statue. The custodian walked away and returned with some toddler high chairs, which he placed to the left of the statue. He began to turn in my direction, and I think he noticed me for a split second, but he turned back around and looked down at the toddler high chairs. It seemed he spaced out again for a few seconds, then scurried to the back of the restaurant. That same night, I went to a party and left just before midnight. McDonald's was closing soon, so I quickly went, hoping to get there in time. At the entrance was the custodian, the Ronald McDonald statue, promotional materials, and the toddler high chairs. Has the custodian been working for 18 hours? He didn't notice me. I sat down and began eating in a far corner. The clock hit midnight, and the last cashier left. I was almost finished eating. At the other side of the restaurant, the custodian watched the cashier leave. He just stood there frozen for minutes, until she drove away. I watched him disconnect the CCTV cameras. Time to go. I quickly and quietly snuck out and went home. For the next week, I could not stop thinking about the custodian. I'm a private investigator and I like to solve mysteries. I had to solve this one, and I was going to. I woke up excited on December 20th, 2008. The day went by quickly. I got to McDonald's at 10 p.m. that night. Eating my food, I saw promotional materials and toddler high chairs near the bathrooms. The Ronald McDonald statue was behind the registers. The custodian walked up from behind on my left side. As he was a foot in front of me, he stopped and continued to look forward. I stopped eating. He started to move his head, but continued forward. I had second thoughts about my investigations, but decided to stick it out. When I was done eating, I threw my trash out. I glanced around and no one was looking. I quickly slipped into the play place and managed to squeeze in the slide entrance. I hid there for 2 hours. The custodian watched the last cashier drive away again. He proceeded to stand up on the register and disconnect the CCTV cameras. He then disappeared to the back. I noticed a door with a lock, which he opened and entered through. Time went slowly by. Near 1 a.m., I started to get creeped out. I tiptoed extremely slowly towards the registers. I could have heard a pin drop, it was so quiet. I passed the Ronald McDonald statue to walk behind the registers. I was heading to the back where I heard noises. The noises were getting faintly louder, and I realized they were moving in my direction. I quickly knelt down to get underneath a counter. It was then I was struck down by what felt like a piece of metal. When I woke up, I was bound with my hands tied behind my back. I was on an old soft couch and smelled like piss. I knew by the faith candle, which was lit, that I was in the small room in the back. There was a rusty sink, tools, and an old TV. The Ronald McDonald statue, a few gallons of water, and many Happy Meal toys scattered around the room. In one corner out of the shadows, the custodian stood up. He, for the first time, made eye contact with me. I saw in his eyes, if I were to describe it in one word, wild. He began to scurry towards me, keeping his gaze. I was frozen. I couldn't do anything else. He was hiding a sharp object in his hand. I knew it was the end. I just hoped it was quick. He cut the rope which bound my wrists. He pierced me with his wild eyes, and in a low, raspy voice he said, "Run." The custodian's head seemed to disappear into the wall as it was replaced by the swinging porcelain fist. I looked up at the Ronald McDonald statue, whose painted smile seemed to grow bigger and bigger. Without thinking, I stood up, juked in one direction faking my motion, and did a ninja roll in the other direction around the Ronald McDonald statue. I ran out of the door. Flying past the registers, I exited the building and got in my car. I put it in drive and looked in the rearview mirror. Inside McDonald's, near the door, is the Ronald McDonald statue. I put the pedal to the metal and peeled out of the parking lot. The next week, that McDonald's location was closed for renovations. I didn't care. It's obvious I'll never go back. Not to that one. Not to any. I no longer need to investigate what's out of my league. I know enough. I'm reminded every time I pass that location. Always there in the window is the Ronald McDonald statue looking out. The weirdo at McDonald's. When I was growing up, my dad and I lived with my grandparents. My parents had me while they were teenagers, and my dad got full custody because he lived with my grandparents, and my mom was just living with random friends, going from house to house every few weeks. I was the daughter my grandparents never had, and they doted on me. When I was 6, my grandpa passed away from cancer. This story takes place about 5 months after he passed away. This was, I believe, a Saturday, and my dad was at work. My grandma decided to take me to McDonald's for lunch, and like any 6-year-old, I was really excited. So we go to the McDonald's that was about 1.5 miles from our house, order our lunch, and sit down at a table to eat. At the time, we were the only ones eating inside. About 10 minutes after we sit down, a scraggly-looking man walks in, orders a meal, and sits down at the table diagonally in front of us to the left. The area we lived in was middle and upper middle class, so this guy looked pretty out of place. Grandma had her back to him, but I could see him perfectly. This man was at least in his mid-50s, with really wiry, scraggy, and dirty white hair and a beard. He had on blue shorts and a white t-shirt, also kinda dirty, and sandals. It's amazing. This happened 21 years ago and I can remember it like it was yesterday. So I noticed that, under the table, this man has something dark pink and wrinkly on his lap, and he kept glancing at me and rubbing it every few seconds. In kindergarten, we learned about stranger danger and good touch, bad touch, and learned which parts of our body people weren't supposed to touch. It clicked in my 6-year-old head that this man was not supposed to have that out like that, nor doing what he was doing. I didn't want to tell my grandma right then and there because I thought the man would hurt us. If my dad had been there, I would have said something because my dad was my hero and could take on anybody. Instead, I put my Happy Meal box in front of my face so my view of this guy would be blocked. I had about half of my food left, but have lost my appetite. Grandma asked me if I was full and I just nodded yes. I was and still am very petite, so not finishing a full meal was nothing new for me. She asked me if I wanted to go play in the play area before we left, but I just shook my head and quietly said, "I want to go home." Grandma cleared our table and we left. When we got home, I was still really nervous, and I felt like I was going to throw up. Grandma asked me, "What's the matter, Munchkin?" her pet name for me, and I started crying and told her about the man at McDonald's and what I saw. My grandma didn't panic or freak or get hysterical. She just hugged me and said, "It's all right. Go on to your room and play and I'll take care of it." She wiped my tears, gave me a blueberry Kool-Aid burst, and told our dog Patches to go to my room with me, which she did. After I was out of earshot, Grandma called the McDonald's and told them about the guy. He was still there. The manager told Grandma he'd take care of it and call her back. An hour later, the manager calls back and tells Grandma they called the police, who showed up in record time and arrested the guy. When the police told the man to stand up, his dick and balls were still hanging out of his shorts. The manager also told Grandma that she could bring me back for a month's worth of coupons for free Happy Meals. I didn't really care, though. This is why I quit my job at McDonald's. When I picked up a job at McDonald's in the winter of 2013, I was the black sheep of the flock among my friends. And not in a bad way either. People started getting shady around me because they were afraid and confused. You see, as a teen living in the urban areas of New York, people fed off rumors, gossip, and urban legends like college kids feed off ramen noodles. My whole life, I had been frightened of alligators that were said to live in the sewers, and ghosts that dwelt in the Statue of Liberty and could be seen with a keen eye and a telescope. Stuff like this was more fascinating to me than anything, to be honest. I took fun in all the legends I grew up around. My friends, however, seemed to take things too seriously. All my friends were really strange, and I don't mean that they licked windows or watched paint dry. They were seemingly normal people on the outside, but once you got to know them, you could easily understand why they were outcasts. But that was fine, because I was one too. Anyways, back to my job. I had taken up the job with enthusiasm, because money was hard to come by in my neighborhood, and getting it without dealing drugs or doing some type of shady shit was even harder. My friends all acted violently when they heard I got the job, telling me all these weird rumors about how the company was all run by Jews, used human flesh to their products, and were tied to the Illuminati somehow. These all gave me a good laugh and didn't startle me much in the slightest at the time. It would be a few weeks into my job when I would start to take my friends' advice with more open ears. My first few days were hard. I was pushed to work long, exhausting shifts, seldom having freedom over what to do, as the manager would scream my next assignment to me. Despite this, however, I always left feeling a strong sense of pride and accomplishment, which helped me to trudge on. Getting my first dosage of money not too far after didn't hurt either. A few weeks into working, I had been put on the night shift in the back, preparing food alongside another worker named John. He was a somewhat older man, somewhere in his late 20s. However, despite the age gap, we ended up becoming really good pals in the nick of time. We would tell each other jokes, have nice conversations, had some joints out in the back a few times, and even shared stories about our life when the night shift got tedious. I will admit, though, I did more of the listening than the talking. For not being much older than me, John had a bunch of incredible stories to tell about his time growing up in New York. Out of all the things we ever did together when we were paired together was talk about his daughter. He kept a photo of her in his wallet, and would frequently point to it or hold it up so it was visible when he had a new story to tell about her. His daughter was a 6-year-old girl with short black hair and glasses. In his picture, she wore a blue dress with teal buttons, running down the center in the fashion of some old-time Victorian bonnet or something. I could tell he was a really great guy by his love for his daughter. A little while in the future, I had to call in work on a Sunday evening due to snowy roads, and I was snowed in for the day. Or so I thought. It turns out my weirdo friends had given me a call telling me to meet them at the park. It was within walking distance, and there was a way you could traverse over there without slipping on the ice-covered roads. So I made my way out to see them. When I finally did meet them out there, they ambushed me with a brief snowball fight, and before we settled down, I made sure I got back at them real good. All huddling on the park bench, we started talking. "So," Isaac said, "how's the job?" I would have told them about all the ups and downs and how it was worth it thanks to my new friend John, but instead I was too focused on the depressing last few days at my job, and ended up telling them how uneasy I was about everything. Everyone had been under constant pressure and bombardment to increase productivity due to the winter giving fast food chains all of the East Coast delayed materials. We were expected to work harder than we ever had to make the burgers, fries, and salads we usually prepared without enough actual food to complete the burgers, fries, and salads. It was bullshit. Worst part is when a customer didn't receive the topping they ordered, or had to be declined a certain menu item. Who did they break down and yell at? That's right, me. I guess I went a little in over my head because my friends started acting up and going on about their urban legends and shit. I remember Ethan leaning in close and softly saying, "I heard that when they run low on sauces, they use animal semen." Among a bunch of other weird ideas. Those are my friends for you. However, this time I was able to deal with their weird outlook on life a little better, that I had some kind of grudge over one of these corporations they insisted was evil in some way. They thought pretty much everything was part of some evil scheme. I never understood how someone could be that paranoid. Anyways, a week or so went by, and eventually the roads got safe enough to where I could start going back to work. The weather outside was still nasty, but at least I could feel safe and cozy inside my car. When I got into work for the first day, after the long snowstorm, I was relieved to see John was in the back stacking boxes into the shelves. I walked up to him and started to make small talk. After a little exchange of telling what he had done over our brief break, he had told me that he had his daughter in his truck, as he only had time to come in here to get a few things done, and didn't have to work a full shift. He even recommended I meet his daughter here after his shift was over. I eagerly agreed and went about my business until he called me out of his truck. However, when we got to the truck, nobody was in there. John started to panic and frantically looked around everywhere to no avail. I had an awful feeling of unease over me and couldn't keep my body from shaking, but I'm sure he had it much more. I remember hugging him and comforting him as the police later came in to form an investigation scene. The next day, John didn't go into work. We stayed at home either moping after his daughter's recent disappearance, or spending time talking to the police about the situation and such. I felt incredibly sorry for him, and offered to take the day off to console him, but he insisted he needed time alone. When I went into work, despite the fact John's life had changed drastically so much even I was affected by it, everything else seemed to go on as it usually did. Well, there was a slight change. The manager had announced we had a new surplus of materials that just came in. This would make our job a little easier like it was before, even though it wasn't very easy before. After working a little bit, I went on my lunch break. I normally bring my own lunch because after you sit around the same food all day, you can't stand it anymore. But in the whole light of the situation with John's missing daughter, I must have to have been mentally unkempt to have remembered. I was too hungry to run over to the store and buy something else during my brief amount of time, so I grabbed some of the hamburger meat that came in today and grilled up a burger for myself with a Coke and some fries. As I sat down at a table I made for myself, I pulled out one of the copies of the picture John had made of the original picture of his daughter he kept in his wallet. The one where she was wearing the blue dress with teal buttons. After gazing at it for a while, I gently put it away, and I made a little prayer before I ate. I was never a religious person, and praying over a McDonald's dinner sounded a little underwhelming, but it was all I could do at the moment. I just felt so sorry for John. As I took a bite of my burger and chewed around, I felt something weird. I was biting against something hard. Was it a piece of fat? Did I not thaw it properly and some of the burger is still frozen? I wrapped my tongue around the piece and spat it out into my hand. It was a teal button.